Hello everybody, welcome to another edition of our Community Access. This week we will visit with the Brain Balance Center. Then we visit the Oxford Leader to show you some Hemmingway exhibit. All today on our Community Access. Welcome back. The Brain Balance Center had some state recognition recently. We Center photographer Kyle Snag was here for you.
Hi, I'm Carrie Odrobina, Center Director at Brain Balance of North Oakland in Oxford, Michigan. And today was an exciting day because we had Alan Mark, host of Michigan Business Biography, which airs on CBS Morning News. He's also the senior correspondent for PBS's segment A Wider World that focuses on organizations that work with people that have disabilities. And he was here because he is featuring Brain Balance of North Oakland in the Michigan Business Biography segment. We have been in Oxford since October of 2015, and when we came to Oxford and opened our Brain Balance Center, it was because we wanted to work with this community and the surrounding communities to work with their kids that are struggling academically, behaviorally, and socially, and let them know that there are alternatives that are natural and that will address the root cause of their children's challenges instead of just trying to mask or accommodate the symptoms. And so we've been here over 2 years now, and in that 2 years, this grew from just our story, which it was our story originally because my son went through the program, and that's what inspired us to open a center here in Oxford. He went through the Brain Balance program with another center. But it's also exciting because now after 2 years, we have lots of families, and this is their story of transformation for their children and their families as well.
Hi, my name is Linda Dylas. My son Grant came to the Brain Balance. He was here for 6 months, but our experience went way beyond just those 6 months. In the beginning, we came because we had tried so many other things that did not work. He struggled in school, he struggled socially, and he had just trouble with balance and the following with his eyes, tracking, reading, but I knew he didn't qualify for a lot of other things. He was one of those kids that probably would have fell through the cracks, but I didn't give up, and we worked really hard on our diet and just living a clean lifestyle. But Brain Balance was that tool in our toolbox that was very helpful and brought him to levels that I never thought we would ever see. He gained confidence, and he grew, and he learned, and he was shown that he needs to dream a lot bigger than what he was dreaming. What happened was he every day worked hard and got better, and he does well in school now, and he can join a sports team. He can swim now. He could never do that before. So my heart overflows for all the parents, and only a parent that struggles with this, with their child, can understand the heartbreak that a parent goes through with their child when they know that they just need a little bit of help. This was the help, this was the tool in the toolbox that I needed, that Grant needed, to push him just to be the boy that he's supposed to be. He now is doing well in school. He has joined the swim team. He has a chance. I just am grateful for what this has done in a natural way.
And so when Alan Mark approached us and said he'd like to feature us on Michigan Business Biography, that was a great opportunity for us to move on to chapter 2 of this story in this community and share the stories of some of the kids and families that we've helped. So it was an exciting day as those families got to see the segment for the first time the day before it actually airs. And it's exciting for us to be able to let more people know about what we do and how we do it so we can help more kids.
Next up, our photographer Russell Currier went to the Oxford Library to check on the Hemmingway exhibit.
right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brian Cloutier. I'm the director here at Oxford Public Library. I also have with me today Rachel Quinn, who is our head of teen services, and Diane Betcher, who is our outreach services librarian, and our program scheduler here at the library. Today, if you did not get the memo, unfortunately, Dr. Bowles and his associate from Central Michigan University will not be able to be with us today. The weather conditions prohibited the opportunity for him to come down safely anyway. And so we were working on rescheduling with him and making sure that we can get him down here so that he can share with you the life and times of Ernest Hemingway and some of the information artifacts that they have available too at the Clark Historical Library. So, with that being said, the show must go on. So, today, I will give you my disclaimer that I am by no means, even though my background is in English literature, it is not in Hemingway. So I'm not a Hemingway expert by any stretch of the imagination. However, I do have some of my staff with me today that are a lot more knowledgeable about Hemingway and will be able to fill in the gaps as we go through today's presentation. I'm more of a historian, so the information that I'm going to share with you today will be more about the artifacts that are in the display cases here behind us and how they relate to Ernest Hemingway and the life and times of Hemingway. With that, I would like to welcome you, of course, to the opening of the Ernest Hemingway exhibit at the Oxford Public Library. I need to mention, certainly, gratitude and appreciation to the Michigan Hemingway Society, the Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs, the Michigan Humanities Council, the Clark Historical Library at Central Michigan University, in local cooperation with, of course, the Oxford Public Library and the Northeast Oakland Historical Society Museum here in downtown Oxford. The artifacts that are on display behind me in the cases are on loan to us from the Northeast Oakland Historical Society Museum here in Oxford. What I thought I would do is sort of take a couple of moments to go through case by case some of the artifacts that are in the cases here and sort of bring life and history to the items and relate them to the life and times of Ernest Hemingway. Of course, we know that Hemingway has lived in a number of different places all over the world. And he also has traveled extensively to places like Africa and Italy while he was in the war, Paris. He lived in Cuba, had a place in Key West, in the Bahamas. So he's been many different places, and of course, his life and times has a broad perspective of historical significance to bring to the table. And so, with that, I will start in our case down here. Among the locations that Hemingway lived, of course, I cannot forget to mention our own state of Michigan. The Hemingway family had a cottage in northern Michigan, and his mother and father would bring the family on many trips to the area and to the region. His father was a doctor, so they would come from their home in Oak Park, Illinois, to the state of Michigan, to their cottage up near Charlevoix, Petoskey, that area of northern, the western side of northern lower peninsula of Michigan. As a child, he had a fascination, and even as an adult, with the native people here in the state of Michigan. And so what I thought I would share with you today is perhaps some artifacts that would tie into that part of his life. We have this piece that came over from the Northeast Oakland Historical Society Museum, and it is an early Native American piece that perhaps would have been an artifact or something like an artifact that Hemingway would have had in his collection as well. But I thought this was kind of fascinating. And of course, tying into Hemingway's interest in in Michigan and the Native American tribes to that part of Michigan. He wrote about that, a lot about those types of stories, not necessarily meant to be true life historic factual information, but taking from historical fiction points of view. He wrote extensively about that in the Nick Adams story. Am I correct, Rachel? Likewise, these are some of the cameras that maybe would have been used by Ernest Hemingway, and perhaps taking photographs of his outdoor journeys. He was quite an avid outdoorsman, not just in his travels, but also in learning and educating himself. And so this camera is the Polaroid Land Model 95 camera, and this is circa 1954. So we're looking around the time period that Hemingway would have been an adult. Likewise, we have also a Kodak Eastman 2A model camera, which would be circa 1924. So this would have been earlier in Hemingway's life.
You know, for a while, he worked as a journalist. And when he just got out of high school, he worked as a journalist for Kansas City, for a newspaper in Kansas City. And then later on, he worked as a journalist for the Toronto Star and was stationed in Europe to report on events going on over there. And I almost wonder, he was more known for the written word, but I almost wonder if at that time there was any photographs included in those reports, you know? I mean, did they do their own photography, I wonder? Or do you know, Rachel, if they did? Because he did work for a journalist, and later on, three of his future wives were journalists also.
Well, I'm going to venture to say that as a historian, that would have been an accurate statement, that he would have done most of his own
Photography,
photography work. These are just a few actual reproduction photographs of something that maybe he would have been taking photographs of using those cameras of the Native people. In fact, there's a picture in the exhibit that shows a young Ernest Hemingway inside of a small Native American teepee, early teepee. Here's another modern fan that would have been used. No significance necessary to Hemingway other than the fact that it has a Native American image on it. And on the back, it was often common to have some type of an advertisement. This is actually an advertisement piece. So we do have advertising on the back of it as well. Hemingway had a very fascinating life. We're going to talk about his bad habits, his smoking habits, as well as his drinking habits. But, you know, Hemingway also would dress up like a gentleman and be that dignitary type role as well. And so every gentleman would have had a walking stick that they would have used, or he would have used.
So are we saying that these artifacts are his?
No, these artifacts are actually property of the Northeast Oakland Historical Society here in town.
Okay.
So they have historical significance and ties to our local history, but we're using these artifacts as examples of what would have told the life and time and the story of Ernie Hemingway.
Okay, in his period.
Yes. If only these artifacts could talk, and we would learn the true story of the original owner of them, it would be quite fascinating, I'm sure.
Yeah.
There is a story about Hemingway, a walking stick. Hemingway met Steinbeck in New York. They had been conversing with each other. They admired each other's work. And they went to a bar together and happened across John O'Hara, another author. And John showed Hemingway a walking stick that Steinbeck had given him and told him it was blackthorn. And Hemingway grabbed it and went, "Blackthorn? That's not blackthorn," and broke it over his head. No. And Steinbeck was very upset with him for a number of years.
Rightfully so. And so perhaps this hat, much like this, might have been something that he would have picked up in his travels or his time living either in Cuba or perhaps even Key West, Florida.
Yeah.
But every gentleman of the day would have a fine hat, one or two. Any author or writer or journalist of the period would have had a small traveling typewriter that they would have taken with them wherever they would go. And so this is a Corona typewriter circa 1920. It is without its carrying case today. It would have had a small case that it would have gone into, so that would make it easy to carry. Now we have a collection too of different types of dipping pens, all different scales, from some that are more elaborate and fancy than others. But these would have been used obviously for writing in concert with a dipping well that would have had ink in it. As a writer and someone who traveled and probably either picked up things along his travels or perhaps received his gifts along the way, would have had a number of different inkwells as well. This is just one example. We have some early earthenware pottery type examples. We also have the simple glass canister that ink would have come in. In fact, we do have a jar that still has a label on it. And it looks like that any remaining ink in this bottle has seen better days. And it's pretty much dry. I picked this one up only because I thought it was very fascinating, where you would have filled it and then you would have opened the lid in the front to gain access to the ink for dipping. And then you would have also had the ink in the main container up here that would have continually filled the lower reservoir down below. And I would probably put this in the Victorian era. I thought these were kind of fascinating, and the reason I picked them up is because they are a matching set. It is a letter opener, and it's also a dipping pen that match each other. And the reason I picked these up in particular is because these very well could have been something that Hemmingway would have picked up in his travels to Africa, because these are African hardwood, and they're very popular to bring back with you in your travels. So these are items that he would have perhaps picked up in Africa. Now, as an avid traveler, he perhaps would have had a stack of airmail envelopes. Back in the day, we had special envelopes that we would use whenever we were sending mail overseas. And this clip looks like it could go with that inkwell that I was talking about earlier. Well, we also have a sleeping cat in here, and I'll talk about the cat in a moment. Now, he was a smoker, and we know that he would smoke a pipe, because there is a photograph of a young Ernest Hemingway on the entry of the exhibit that does show us that part of his history. And so, I brought over from the museum an early tin, and the reason I selected this tin, this tobacco tin, is because it also has ties to Detroit, Michigan. It is a Scott and Dillon company, Detroit, Michigan. And it also has an image of the Native American on the front of it. So this would have been perhaps something that he would have picked up. And this is circa 1880. Likewise, I just have a simple half and half tobacco tin. This is more something that the common person would have had. Sounds like there's even something still in it. Now, I'm sure cigars weren't the only reason that Hemingway brought his life to Cuba, but we'll use our imagination a little bit and stretch our liberty in that dialogue. And perhaps this is a tin that he would have picked up to hold his cigars, or perhaps cigars were probably sold in this tin, and the label is missing from the tin, is what I speculate. But it is an early humidor that cigars would have been stored in and sold in some cases. With that, Hemingway probably would have had a collection of old pipes. Hopefully he never mixed alcohol with gambling, but maybe he did. And I thought this was a rather fascinating artifact. It's an old, I would again put this probably in the Victorian era. It's an old case that you would have kept your playing cards in. Yeah, it might be a little too fancy for Ernie Hemingway, but And if he was mixing the gambling in the drink, hopefully he was not also mixing what I'm about to pull out of the case next. But we'll say as an avid hunter and outdoorsman and someone who served in the military, he perhaps had an interest with different types of antique firearms. And so this is just one example of a German model black powder pistol that would have been used. And the accuracy on these types of pistols was not one that you would use for hunting. It was one that you would particularly probably use for self-defense and in military battle as well, within close proximity, because there was not accuracy to these at all. That's why so many of our early settlers and forefathers to our country survived some rather, I'm going to call it reckless, but some rather unfortunate events where they would have dueling pistols as well, and you would each grab a pistol from the box and you would walk so many paces from each other and turn and fire. Well, good thing for misfire and inaccuracy, because we had a lot of our early settlers and forefathers of our country that actually survived these and realized that these types of battles, and realized that it was worth discussing in dialogue and resolution rather than firing at each other with a pistol. So thank you for inaccuracies in these guns. Likewise, this is an early powder horn that would have been used in conjunction with the black powder pistol. And you would have filled it on the top end, and then the bottom end would have been used to pour into the firing device. And those two the artifacts there, I'm going to say were probably circa early 1800s, even perhaps late 17, but probably likely early to mid 1800s is that era. And then, as a gentleman who liked his fine distilled beverage, let's say, this is an early salt glazed crock that would have been used to hold that fine beverage for later consumption.
It's like a moonshine jug.
You got it. You know, when we think about the way we live our lives today versus the way we lived our lives back then, it's fascinating sometimes what we learn from our history, and you know, we consume a lot of things that we just throw away today, whereas they had a much different way of life and different thought process back then. Then we have an early silver plate drinking glass. And so I left the cat, the sleeping cat, for last. This is actually a hand-carved, wooden, hand-painted cat. But do we know why I would have put this in the display case? Do we all know the history of Hemingway's relationship with cats? Yes, the polydactyl cat would have been a fascination of Hemingway's. In fact, I have some information that I took from the Hemingway Society site or his home rather, in Key West, where his polydactyl cats are. The Ernest Hemingway Home and Museum is home to approximately 40 to 50 polydactyl six-toed cats. Cats normally have 5 front toes and 4 back toes. About half of the cats at the museum have the physical polydactyl trait, but they all carry the polydactyl gene in their DNA, which means that the ones that have 4 and 5 toes can still mother or father 6-toed kittens. Most cats have extra toes on their front feet and sometimes on their back. Sometimes it looks as if they're wearing mittens because they appear to have a thumb on their paw. Ernest Hemingway was given a white 6-toed cat by a ship's captain, and some of the cats who live on the museum grounds are descendants of that original cat, named Snow White. Key West is a small island, and it's possible that many of the cats on the island are related. Polydactyl cats are not a particular breed. The trait can appear in any breed: calico, tabbies, tortoiseshell, white, black, etc. They vary in shapes and size, colors, and personalities. Hemingway named all of his cats after famous people. So we follow the same tradition today, meaning they at the Hemingway Museum and House follow that same tradition today with the cats. Cats are capable of learning and responding to their names, particularly if they have an affectionate relationship with the person who calls them. So he did have a fascination with the six-toed polydactyl cat, and even today there are descendants of that original cat at the Hemingway home in Key West, Florida. And if you followed the hurricane that came through not too long ago, the curator of the home opted to stay with the cats, and they did indicate that the cats knew that the storm was coming and all went inside the home for safety, so that they could lock down the home and secure it. And fortunately, the Hemingway home in Key West didn't experience a whole lot of damage at all. It was pretty much spared in this disastrous zone that so many suffered from. Perhaps we'd like to think someone was looking over the Hemingway house in Key West and its museum and the people who take care of it each and every day. So on that note, unless my colleagues would like to add some information about Hemingway's life and times, I would like to open the exhibit to you to walk through. Feel free to ask any of us any questions that you might have. We'll do our best to answer those. And please remember to join us in the future for our other fireside chats that we will be having. And also join us in welcoming Mr. Bowles and his colleague from CMU when they can make the trek down. So thank you for coming.
Well, there you go. That's all the time we have for this week, and we hope you enjoyed our program. So, for our photographers Kyle Snag and Russell Currier and producer Terry Stiles, I'm Bill Service, and you have a great, great week.
To pose, now shush. She makes the sound she makes to calm me down. Oh.